Hi, everyone. This is Amy Valdivia, and this is the Divorce Literacy Podcast from the Divorce Lending Association. And I am very grateful to have a few moments with Miss Heather Poole, immigration attorney extraordinaire. Let me tell you, people, we have a great episode here because this woman, she completely hit me right between the eyes when I first met her. And I was blown away because she gave me completely different angle about divorce that I never considered in the past. I'm excited to introduce her to all of you. And I'm sure, I have no doubt that you're going to find all of her information just useful and want to connect with her. Thank you for being here, Ms. Heather.
Oh, thank you for the invitation, Amy.
We got to jump right in. Tell us, who's Heather and immigration? Really? How'd you get into this?
So it's been my entire legal career. I'm on my 23rd year of being an immigration lawyer. And I got into this because I was a political activist in college and wanted to go into civil rights law. And during law school, I got to work for the EEOC, interning on national origin discrimination claims. And I realized how differently immigration, even legal immigrants, are treated in this country. And I realized with more study that this group, more than any other population, whether it's women, race, gender, religious orientation, it doesn't matter. This group in particular has the least amount of protections under the law. And I said, this is the most vulnerable people. I want to represent them. And I hit the ground running and have never done any other type of law.
Activism. It's been part of your life, apparently, your whole
Yes.
life. Tell me the background. Where did you get this? Because not everybody just sits there and says, I'm going to be the champion and I'm going to advocate for everybody. Something's different. Go ahead.
Well, not the champion, but I try to play my part. That's for sure. So during college, I went to college. Luckily, put myself through school, and came to college after a really horrible work experience where I was sexually harassed. And I was 19 years old, and I reported it to the HR department. And instead of doing anything to my boss who was doing it, actually two different bosses, they just transferred me out of the department. And I felt so frustrated, and it was a really poor introduction to the legal system. And so by the time I got to college and could afford to, go and go to a state school, I realized that this anger was still in me. So from there, I went into the library one day, looked up some local resources, went to some women's groups, and my eyes were just opened. I realized that everything I believed, everything I knew about politics was because of what my parents had told me. Never really thought about it independently, and it led a total shift. I was going to be a hotel or restaurant manager, and I shifted into philosophy and history and became a political activist. And it was during the time in California when we had Prop 209, which was the anti-affirmative action in state schools and government benefits, that they were trying to take it out. And I was trying to educate people that, we are still way far behind with gender equality and race equality in this country. And it's the wrong time to take away affirmative action, so we can create that equal footing. And unfortunately, we lost that battle, but it was a good introduction to me about how important it was, if you believe in something, to stand up for it. But I also realized, very critical during that time, that there's only so much I could do pounding outside the door, outside the window, to change the system. And if I really wanted to be an instrument of change and on a more widespread basis, I need to be part of the system. So that's why I decided to go to law school and was going to be a civil rights attorney.
It actually became your therapy to deal with
Yeah,
the
it
situation.
did. It did. Yeah. Everything happens to you, even the negative stuff, for a reason. And it's what you do with that. If you let it consume you, or do you overcome it and use it? And that's what I chose to do.
Now, these underrepresented individuals that you advocate for,
Yes.
how do you think this therapy session that you put yourself through really helps you to advocate for these individuals?
I know what it feels like to feel, disempowered. I was working paycheck to paycheck, and couldn't afford to push it further when they didn't do anything to my managers, because I didn't want to get in trouble and I didn't want to lose my job. And it was really, really frustrating also because there were other women in the department who were my friends and they saw what happened to me and I'm not going to report that. Look what happened to you, you know?
Wow.
And immigrant population on top of that, a lot of them are feeding families, and I was just feeding myself, right? So they have a lot of pressure not to lose a job, and especially those who are undocumented, they're working under the table for cash, or it's an entry level job because their education, even if they're legally here, education doesn't necessarily equate to the U.S. version, so employers take advantage of that. So they just find themselves in a much more vulnerable position than someone who's born here.
Right. And when you find that you're in that situation, you lose hope.
Yes.
Hence, all these years later, I meet you and we start talking about divorce. And women, many times, because coincidentally, that just happens to be the cases that fall in my lap more often than not, dealing with the women, they feel hopeless.
Yes.
And I was blown away because you educated me about immigration status and divorce and what I was just talking about, hope and hopelessness. Share a little bit about your thoughts in that area.
First, I gotta throw some compliments back your way too. You quite enlightened me as well. I didn't know there was someone who actually focuses on special kinds of loans and options for women who feel very vulnerable in positions where they've been the homemaker, they've been the one who has not been working full time, so they're at a major disadvantage compared to the husband in a divorce action, and that there are ways you can get creative with mortgage financing, right? In order to help them keep the home or at least have, some good money coming in so they can go back to school and keep the kids and have a life, and not sacrifice everything just because they want to leave a bad marriage. So it's up to you. I think you pull off miracles every day, and I'm glad that I found you too. So a lot of the cases that I work with are women and men in bad marriages. Either their spouses aren't sponsoring them for a green card because they think, well, this is going to give her reason to leave me. Well, I always say, if you weren't, such a jerk, maybe she wouldn't. But and they hold that over, the immigrant's head, that, oh, or they promise, right? I'm going to file for you, or just, and give her excuse after excuse after excuse and never do. By the time, she gets to me, she's finally believing this is never going to happen. And she knows she can't really get a good paying job because she's working under the table and the employers take advantage of that. And so what we do is try to find her a remedy through the Violence Against Women Act, which
Mm,
applies to both men and women, and it can allow her to get a green card based on any combination of physical, emotional, mental, or financial abuse or cruelty. And it doesn't have to be all of those things. It can be a pattern of just financial cruelty. And we help her think outside the box. How can we document what's been happening to you besides just your story without your husband knowing what you're doing, right? It's a completely
right,
confidential process, but we also work with her to do it so if she doesn't want to leave, she doesn't have to leave, right? But maybe she's going to have to call us from work. Maybe we're going to have to use a separate email that he doesn't know about, doesn't contain any part of her name.
right,
We get creative in order to make sure that she can do this, and we're not going to interrupt whatever she's going on in her life. Maybe she wants to stay with her husband, not because she wants to stay with him, but because the kids are young, right? But then part of this process, it's a very empowering process where she puts on paper what's happened to her, and people come, who are her friends and become her witnesses. And she realizes usually, I mean, 99% of the time, about halfway through, I need to leave this guy.
mm,
I want a divorce, right? So, and she comes to me normally saying, well, do you do divorces, Heather? Say, no, I do not. However, the benefit of our relationship is your husband doesn't know about me. If we file for a divorce, he's going to know about me. So I regularly refer out to family lawyers. And one of the first questions I get is, well, can she afford my fees? Right. And then so I start talking to her about, what kind of assets do you have? Well, you put the house in both of our names, but he pays the mortgage because I don't work, or a myriad of combinations. So some family lawyers will work with Amy to work sort of like on a contingency basis. If we can get the house under her name, then she can refi, and then she can pay my legal fees from there.
Right.
So creative individuals. It's not just, oh, you got to be sitting on a ton of cash in order to file for divorce, right? That's not realistic. It doesn't happen most of the time. So that's one scenario. There's other people who their spouses have actually filed their green cards for them, and they have what's called a conditional green card, which is a green card that's only valid for 2 years because the marriage itself was less than 2 years old at the time that the green card was first approved. It was Congress's way of trying to test out the waters. Let's make sure this isn't a fraudulent marriage, a
Right.
friend helping a friend, or someone getting paid off. So at that end of the 2-year period, she's got to file more paperwork to convert the 2-year to a permanent green card, which is like a 10-year green card. And if their marriage is falling apart and she's getting a divorce, soon after she got her green card or within that 2-year period, that's going to be really hard for her to do. So again, she's got to hire shouldn't have to, but she should hire a competent immigration attorney to help with that and take her out of the dependence of her husband to file with her, right? If he's
Right.
holding it over her or threatening to have her deported or a myriad of other problems in their relationship, she wants to take him out of the equation. She can file a waiver based on proving that the marriage was real, and she can get a final divorce and get a particular type of waiver that doesn't require abuse. But then there's the abuse waiver that you don't have to have a divorce. You can be right in the middle of the divorce. And that's really, really important. As you know, working in the state of California, divorces take a long time here. I
Right.
mean, minimum 6 months by statute, and then it's going to sit on the judge's desk for a while.
Yeah.
So if someone's got a 2-year green card and their spouse leaves them 3 months before that paperwork is due, like, Heather, there's no way I can get a divorce in time. There's no way. It's like, that's okay. We're going to file under this ground, and maybe the other ground is stronger, but this one doesn't require a divorce. We're going to do some shifting around, because that's one thing we can count on is the divorce will take forever, even if he doesn't find it. So we have some predictability and timeline there. So it's important when you're contemplating divorce or you think that your spouse is going to kick you out, that you focus and talk to an immigration attorney right away without your spouse, obviously. And you talk to someone like Amy and a family lawyer, right, who really know your situation and can figure out how you can get the money and how you can keep your home, how you can start at a new home if that's really what's better for you, right? So that's a really emergency situation. Someone who has a ticking time bomb on that green card. Most of the time, people come to us less than the 3 months, or the green card's already expired, and now they can't show for their employer that they continue working. They can't leave because they're going to not be able to come back to the U.S. But luckily, under the law, we're able to still file late, even after the green card is expired. I've filed some 4 or 5 years later that by miracle they haven't been placed in removal proceedings yet. So I don't say wait that long, but it is possible.
Wow.
So yeah, some unique situations.
Now, when we talk about creativity, you and I have bantered about this in the past. Income. How does someone who has temporary status, who's not technically a citizen, who really feels trapped, who maybe their name is or is not on the house, and we really need time under our belt to build our case on our side?
Yeah.
How do I know what I normally say about creating an income stream with alimony or separate maintenance, depending on which state you're in, as well as, using funds from retirement via quadros, things like that. But in an immigration situation, it may not be as simple as I may think. True?
True. So first of all, I should make clear out there that a lot of people have this stereotype of who the immigrant is, right? Someone who's undocumented, who's poor, who doesn't have any education. And I think that's a very limited view of immigration. Most of my clients are upper middle class professionals who are here either on temporary visas, like an H-1B, or are partway through the process to get their green cards, or they have that conditional green card. They have a lot to lose because they have these great careers here already. So they have the income stream, but they're worried that the income stream is going to stop as soon as they lose that green card, right?
Right.
So in the scenario you were talking about, if what we need to do is buy time for you and time for the family lawyer and time for the divorce to become final, we'll work with them on let's get a waiver filed so you keep your job and you keep your income stream by the time your green card expires. And right now with current processing time, it could take to 3 years. And CIS is actually issuing receipt notices now up to 48 months. So it extends your green card by 4 years after the expiration date, even if they don't make a decision. We're hoping they make a decision by then. But if not, that gives you exactly what you need to keep your job, which is most important no matter what your spouse does to you.
Now, what if you don't have a job, but you want it in a woman's situation where we've talked about this case too? She's a stay-at-home mom.
Yeah.
She's been at home. She maybe came here for an education and then ended up staying. She does not have citizenship. And she's truly relying on this other human, to pay her
Yeah.
way and take care of her children. How do we get income in that situation?
Well, first we should probably distinguish between citizenship and green card and no status at all,
Right.
right? Somebody who is a U.S. citizen can never be deported. They can be jailed, but they can never be deported. The other spouse has no control, right? Where permanent residency, you can be a permanent resident the rest of your life. You can work anywhere you want that will hire you. So
Okay.
even if you've been a stay-at-home mom, if you can go back to work with that. But then you got people who don't have residency to begin with, don't have that green card. They're either undocumented or they're here on temporary visas. If a lot of the times what we'll find is the one of the spouses is here on like a student visa where the other one's a U.S. citizen,
Right.
and one is here on a visitor visa and needs to transfer them to another visa type that will allow them to work, but it will depend on their education. Work visas are more difficult to get, if you don't have any education. Though there are we have treaties with some countries that allow women to go and men to go into business for themselves, and it doesn't require necessarily an income stream, but it does need to show that you have a substantial amount of capital that you can invest. But that term substantial is not defined. So we're going to do a real thorough background on what her experience is before this marriage, and what we can use and see, well, maybe we transfer you to a student visa now, you get your master's, you get that great job, you get that, curricular practical training, which is a work permit you get during school, get some experience. Right? We work with her with a plan based on where she is.
So it's all truly about her status and to know
Yes.
what the background is.
Yeah.
Now, I was really surprised. You cited a case in one of our conversations about I believe it was a gentleman who wasn't allowed to do anything. Would you please share about that case? I know one of my questions is I want to know about your unique cases, but boy, oh boy, it seems like every case that I hear from you, it is totally unique.
It's I can't even remember which one you're talking about because that's a common theme, unfortunately. And people will say, well, why didn't he just leave his wife? Well,
Right.
there's involved, and he's the primary caretaker. He doesn't want to lose access to his kids, or his wife is the U.S. citizen. Even if he's working part-time or full-time, she'll steal his paycheck.
That's the
Um,
one.
so yeah, I had one where the wife forced him to work in her business for free, um, even though he was not legally here. So that was unlawful work, and he was really worried about, having an INS raid. Basically, officers show up to the job site at any time and say, "Hey, show me your papers," and then he was terrified going to work every day.
Wow.
But most of the time, what I see with financial manipulation with men is the women will use the joint bank account as soon as he puts in the money from his job, she'll just start spending like crazy. And one of the more humiliating cases I had, he was a professional pro. I'm not going to, a professional sports trainer. I'm not going to say the type of sport, but he was working double shifts, and
Oh,
it's an outdoor activity. You know, it's rough to begin with, a lot of running around, because his wife was just, you know, using all the money. She quit her job as soon as they got married, and then he found out that she was cheating on him, and she was continuing to use the joint bank account to go on these elaborate meals, dining excursions with her new boyfriend, book hotel rooms with her new boyfriend,
and this man
and
was not a
he
citizen.
felt he can do nothing about it. You know, he came to me just like, well, she holds all the cards, you know, she could withdraw my green card case at any point. I feel like I'm stuck with this. And I'm looking at this man, and he was, I want to say, late 20s. He looked like he was in his 40s. I was like, well, you don't look healthy. He said, yeah, I've had to go to, you know, some doctor's appointments because they have to give me special shots so I can stand all day. And I'm like, your body is physically falling apart because, you know, you're trying to keep up with your wife's demands. So you have to put up with this, you know. And you know, there's cultural things in there too. There's also with men, it's harder, you know, to admit to women using them in this way. But I've had, instead of reporting it or leaving the relationship, I just have them either founding another business or working harder or more hours, you know, trying to make sense of her, trying to think that, you know, she's gonna revert back if you just keep her happy, you know, really sad. And on top of that, certain cultures, I have a lot of men from Pakistan and India
Mm.
who very naturalized Pakistani or Indian women who are, you know, US citizens, but they were originally from those countries. And part of the culture is that you sometimes move in your in-laws. So if the wife is abusive to begin with, she's going to use them as another form to ridicule him, put him down, threaten
Mm.
him. And I see it all the time. You know, threats to call the police on him and lie about him, that he's not making enough money, throwing things at him. You're not good enough for my daughter, just really treating him as a servant. I mean, just horrible things. And I'm like, how do you put up with this, right? And it's a cultural pressure also not to be disrespectful to your in-laws, you know. But it's like, you not only got one person, you got three people ganging up on you. So I have a lot of respect. I have probably about 50-50 men and women share between these type of cases. And I'm usually the first person the guy has ever talked to about this. It's so humiliating, you know. And when I talk to them, usually about 95% of them book with me, you know, become my client because it's like, I don't want to go through this again. I want this again, you
No,
know. But I have to also talk to them, are you willing to go to therapy and work on this? Because, you know,
right.
yeah, you need to keep your job and it's affecting your concentration, and you know, you're phasing out in work
Your
meetings and
health,
spacing out, and you're irritable with your coworkers. You know, you need to get a hold on this. And for a lot of people, only people who go to therapy are crazy people. That's what their culture teaches them.
right?
So there's also that as well, trying to convince, you know, them that it's okay, that, you know, Americans do, we go to therapy, you know.
Those are the first two things I was thinking. Number one, now you've got this big macho man that you've
Mm,
just therapized yourself
mm,
and then told him that he needs a therapist. Secondly, the big macho man, you're a female
yeah,
telling him what to do and how to live his life.
yeah, yeah,
And oh, yeah, you probably need to get a divorce. So now I'm telling you how to run your personal life, not just your work life as well.
yeah.
How do you get through that?
Well, I make it pretty clear when we first start talking that we're going to be talking about some sensitive stuff, and I am not judging him for whatever he does, but my job is to protect his immigration situation and to empower him to fix this and change it. And that's one thing you don't have to have over your head. If you want to stay with her, I'm not going to judge you for that. But how would it feel for you not to have immigration on your shoulders all the time? You know, that's what my job is. So I think a lot of the men I deal with look at me like a big sister,
Mm.
and also think, and a lot of them are very close to their sisters, but they also think, well, I like her confidence. She comes off like a guy, stereotypical guy.
Right.
I'm like, okay, I think that is the compliment. Because I've done a lot of these cases, and I think there's also this breakthrough where I ask a lot of details, and when I hear it, and I say, wow, I've heard that before, and that is very validating to them. Is that, oh, I'm not a freak. I'm not the only person this has ever happened to. And again, first person they've ever talked to, so I know it's a huge responsibility for me to not make them feel judged, or tiny for putting up with it. And then after all of this, the end of the call, almost all of them ask me, well, immigration's not going to do anything to her, right? I mean, the cops aren't going to arrest her, right? And I said, no, this is all about protecting you. This is completely
Yeah,
confidential. I'm your attorney. I don't need to talk to her. I'm not going to talk to her. I don't want
that's
her knowing about
interesting.
me. And luckily, under these laws, the immigration agency, USCIS, is legally forbidden from telling the other spouse if he were to file a case like this. It's for their own protection. So not only civilly liable, but they're criminally liable. So that also is another sort of comfort to
Right.
whoever I talk to. But we're also very careful. We really flush out a lot, and we try to figure out who could be a witness. But said if there's any inkling that this person, is either a mutual friend or is a family member, we're not going to use them. If you have any inkling, any self doubt, that this person can turn around and tell her what you're trying to do, not worth the risk. It makes it much more difficult if she finds out what you're doing and then writes into immigration and there's a whole big thing, and so let's just worry about protecting you.
That's so
So
interesting to me.
yeah, thank you.
Here they are protecting, they're so worried about their protection, you're protecting them, and yet they're still protecting the abuser,
Yeah,
the
because
person.
they see the glimmers, right? They see every now and then she acts like she did before, right? That's the person I fell in love with. That's the cycle of domestic violence. And they'll have a couple good months, and all of a sudden, she'll get violent again, or she'll go back to humiliating him in front of her friends. And so I think it's with any gender, right? If you're in the middle of it, you can't see it,
True.
right? And then the other major concern I have with whether it's female or male is I can't prove this. It all happened in private. And I said, okay, let's talk it out, oh, but I can't prove that. And I was like, stop focusing on what you can prove. Let's get the story down. And then we'll come up with ways inside the box that you can prove this. And I think that's where a lot of people don't come forward because they think that there's nothing that can be done. And majority of the time, they're being told this by the abuser, that
Right.
you're dependent on me. I can call immigration at any time. I can get you deported. You can't,
Right.
you're going to leave the country because of me if I don't file this case for you. Or,
That carrot's just
yeah,
constant.
I'm going to withdraw your green card case if you piss me off. So it's sad that, but I mean, if you hear that all day, it's very hard to believe the opposite.
Of course, of course. So initial consultation.
Yeah.
Tell me about that, because in my world, we talk about the divorce team.
Mm,
In your situation, you are technically part of the divorce team as well, if that's where they're going. So tell
correct.
me about what the initial consultation looks like, and when you realize that it's divorce, how you segue to that.
Well, we definitely focus on their immigration history first and what's
Right.
been filed, so we can find out right away. Is there a case pending? Do we have a deadline that we're working with? Maybe they had a green card interview that the wife completely sabotaged, right? And they're waiting for a decision. And we know that that decision is going to be bad. So we'll focus on, well, we need to just file a skeletal. So you stay in valid status, you can keep your work permit, in case that other case goes away, you have a backup. Then I'll ask, well, if they're separated, have you filed for divorce? Has she threatened to file for divorce? Do you think that's really coming? Right. And then sometimes I'll actually say, maybe this is not the right time to file for divorce. It all comes down to, he knows his abusive spouse the best. Is she likely to retaliate and call immigration if you file for divorce? Is she likely to retaliate and call immigration if you don't respond to her divorce filing, right? So, and then if there is a filing, I'll ask if he has a divorce attorney and what stage it's in. I always try to get them, in the beginning, where I can refer them to somebody. But if they haven't filed yet, but they've consulted a couple and they're going to hire one, then I said, well, make sure they're not going to sign anything or file any complaint with the court until they send it to me, because we want to look for any immigration red flags.
Right.
And I remember a couple instances where one case, I love this divorce attorney because she was so fired up and pissed off for my client. She was like his advocate. She's like, we're going to ask for this, we're going to ask, and she asked for alimony, and and I said, and I talked to him about this. I was like, will this make her mad? Will this make her retaliate? And he said, yeah, I'm concerned about that. I'm like, okay, so let's tell your lawyer to take it off, right? Let's just try to get the divorce as quickly as possible. You split everything, right? The other issue I found is that, well, there's two other issues. One, some people don't realize they're divorced. So the divorce got filed either in different county, or they claimed that they couldn't be found to be served. And most of the time that happens in an annulment situation, which is really bad. Because in annulments, at least in the state of California, in most states, you have to have, liberal grounds. Where a divorce here, it's just, we just didn't get along. Irreconcilable differences,
Right.
the big old catch-all. But for an annulment in the immigration context, the number one reason is fraud. That she married me for a green card, right? The ground of annulment is fraud. And so if it's filed and you don't respond to it, major problem, because you're basically admitting the fraud in front to immigration. If it's filed against you and you don't know about it, then you need to go to an immigration family lawyer and reopen that thing, right? So you don't have this horrible judgment that immigration is going to want to see, right? So a lot of it is working. Oh, and the other issue that I see with family lawyers is because my client wants so desperately to get it over with and shut it down and never have to talk to her again, he'll pay her $25,000 just to get the divorce done. And I said, this looks awful, right? It's like you're paying her for a green card. Well, if you're doing that, I just want it done. And I give her a lump sum. And I said, well, if you're going to give her a lump sum, there needs to be some reason in the family code that this would apply. Are you giving this sum as projected alimony? It needs to be really spelled
Right.
out in that paperwork, right? So it can be very tricky if I get to them after the divorce has been filed or final.
It's so, I love this conversation. Number one, the big buzz right now in the divorce world, amicable. For you, it may not necessarily be amicable. It's the path of least resistance.
Yes.
That's sometimes what we really need to accomplish. And then we do talk about these lump sums of money, and we do talk about restructuring or structuring in general and figuring out the path of least resistance. Now, how can we make this divorce actually happen?
Mm-hmm.
It's so different to hear your perspective, because sometimes we're going, what do you mean? It's okay that we can negotiate, we can go back and forth, or go ahead and do the payout, because that's the path of least resistance on our side. But
Right.
it may not necessarily be the right for you, because it does look like you just paid for the green card.
Yep. Bad optics, usually. Yeah. So it'd be helpful to get a letter from you if you handle the mortgage, right? That the reason we did this was because the house was worth this much money, and this gave the person, instead of getting joint title, they bought them out. And so this is where, a reason for why there is this big payment made, right?
Wow.
I saw one divorce where it said the person is literally paying back for the immigration sponsorship and all the filing fees. I was like, no.
Oh my gosh. So, okay, that's perfect segue to my next question, because oftentimes you hear the CDLP say it's the language. It's not my job to know the law. It's my job to know lending guidelines.
Yeah.
I know my lane. Your lane is law. But law and guidelines, law and lending guidelines aren't always synonymous.
Right.
So to your point, the verbiage that's used in the settlement may not necessarily be so helpful when they come to doing the equity buy.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Wow, I
Yeah.
didn't think about that. That's amazing. And
Yeah.
if they came to me, I would say, yes, let's be very, very, very specific. You may not necessarily want it to be so specific that it says for the immigration
Right. Right.
situation.
Exactly.
Wow.
So it's really important that all the professionals who are working with you talk together, right? Or
Yes.
at least if something's happened in the past that you can get some kind of justification for that. Because I know we've been talking more about, abuse cases, financial manipulation, that kind of thing. But there are situations where you're in a perfectly good marriage and you're an immigrant, you got your green card, and then you divorce, let's say 5 years later, and you have your naturalization interview. Well, you still got your green card through the marriage, and you stuck it out for a long time, so it looks good. But then they're going to want to see your divorce decree.
Mm.
So when you try to naturalize, become a citizen. So if there's some really bad language in there, it could haunt you
Right.
even then, even if it's innocent, right? Based on something that, because, Amy needed you to do this to move the money here in order to get
Right.
that. So that's why it's really important. Don't file for divorce by yourself. Be talk to your immigration lawyer before you work with a mortgage specialist like Amy. Just I know you want it over with, but be safe about this.
Everybody involved, all the professionals involved need to be communicating and, hey, I'm putting this verbiage in for my side. Are you good with this as well? And making sure
Yeah.
that we're all on the same page. Okay, here it is. It's that time, that moment of all these unique cases.
Mm.
What's the one that just tugged at you and just stays with you, Miss Advocate?
That that's so hard to say because I there's so many. I am floored every day by the bravery of my clients.
Wow.
I had a woman who was came here, worked on a fake H-1B because she was desperate to send money home for her mom. And then she found an immigration lawyer when she was put into removal proceedings to defend her. And he rescheduled her appearance so they could work on it, but then never gave her the new date because he started hitting on her and he was making sexual advances. And so she fuckered him. So she didn't know that she had a new date, and the judge didn't tell her because he was no longer her attorney and just let it sit. So she had a horrible situation where she was deported without knowing about it. And these are some of the worst, this is one of the worst consequences in the immigration law. If you were to leave the country and have one of these in your absence called an in absentia order, it doesn't matter if you're in a happy marriage to a US citizen now, he can't even sponsor you. You can't file anything until you've been out for at least 5 years. There's no waiver, nothing you can do.
5 years.
So that's a real trying on a relationship. So luckily, she later fell in love, didn't know about this order, um, and we did a FOIA with Freedom of Information Act request in order to get all of her records from the immigration court and USCIS to figure out what had been filed, what wasn't, and where stage was. And we found out about this. And I said, well, first of all, we got to reopen this order right away because ICE can remove you because you have a removal order. They can just pick you up wherever you are. You don't have to see a judge and they can take you outside the US. And her husband was in a very high stress career, was really freaked out and worried about her, understandably. And so we filed a motion to reopen with the court many years later, explaining the circumstances. And luckily, the attorney by then had been disbarred. So it was great evidence. And then immigration, we filed a new case based on the new husband. And immigration decided, even though she was going to consular process, she because she didn't come in legally, she would have to go to her own consulate. And that was the worry, was that if she still had this 5-year order, she's screwed the minute she leaves.
Right.
So we got to reopen that. And then so we filed based on the new husband. And then immigration decides to book an interview in person with her husband. And this was back in, I think it was in Chicago. And the first concern was, uh-oh, they can send ICE officers to her interview and arrest her and take her then. They're not going to care that she's remarried, you know? So we filed a motion to reopen with the court, showed it was, she got no notice because she didn't know about it, on the reasons why. And 2 days later, she had her interview, and like clockwork, 2 immigration agents showed up to her interview. And I luckily had one of my attorneys fly to Chicago to be present for this and to have proof on her. And she gave the ICE attorneys a copy of the motion that we filed with the court. And so they wouldn't put her in handcuffs that day. It was so close.
Oh my gosh.
I know, it was very dramatic. And so we ended up getting that case approved, but it was the first step. So we had to basically, now the order was eventually reopened. So now she has active removal proceedings. So she still can't leave the United States because that would be an active removal, basically. She's deporting herself. So she and the new husband show up for a hearing, and I'm doing it telephonically. And make a long story long, we filed a waiver for all of her unlawful presence ahead of time. And the judge said, well, I'll give her 60 days to leave to her consulate interview. So we had to time everything perfectly. Got the waiver approved. She interviewed, came back to the US as a green card holder, all done. And they're the sweetest people. She now runs, she's a manager at a major lodge in Utah. She's really turned her life around, and her husband is much calmer and still doing very successful in his career. So they're very happy, and they've of course referred their friends to me because they came to me and said, we know this is impossible. This is the situation that we know about. And I was very blunt with them. I'm like, well, this could go in a lot of bad directions quickly. How much are you willing to risk? You know, it's either the risk of staying under the radar and seeing if something's going to happen and the law is going to change. But I said, I think that's pretty unrealistic with our current Congress. You're not going to get any beneficial laws to help her. Said, but you're also hoping that ICE just never looks at their old removal orders and goes and starts trying to find people. So, and this was done during the Trump era when there was no priority list. So he was going after everybody. So there was just no way of predicting, right, the danger of staying under the radar versus doing something. So very courageous people trusted me throughout this long, I want to say it was a 2 or 3 year process.
Wow.
And they got what they wanted in the end, but very, very scary for people. And I understand why a lot of people, you know, put their heads in the sand because there's so much to lose, you know? So, but yeah, I was very fortunate that they had faith in what I was shoveling.
Well, kudos to you. My goodness gracious. I can understand now why somebody would call you. I mean, that's amazing. What protection and advocacy. Kudos to you. Which now all I kept hearing in my mind as you were talking was lawyer up. You know, you've heard that.
You really interview your lawyer. There's some bad ones out there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
At the same time, you know, you're walking into a divorce or an immigration situation, lawyer up, interview your lawyer, but make sure that they're able to communicate together because you need to have the team.
Yes.
All that to say, okay, how do they find Attorney Heather Poole? How can they find you if they want to work with you? Because clearly this interview, if it does not grab somebody's attention, I don't know what does, because my goodness, this is the woman you need to advocate on your behalf.
Well, thank you.
How do they find you?
You know, luckily our website is a really good place to find me. It's humanrightsattorney.com. I was a very early adopter of the power of the internet. I think my first website in its really horrible status was in 2001. But I have a lot of my clients, because of the nature of immigration, they come to the US, they don't know anybody, they don't have support networks, so they're going to their friend Google, right? So a lot of people can find me that way really easily. If you just put in Heather Poole in the search results, it's me, and a flight attendant will show up, basically.
I'm
not the flight attendant.
I found both of you on LinkedIn, and I thought, wow,
Yeah, she's published a book or two. It was funny early on her website. She's like, I am not the immigration attorney.
I often call you Wonder Woman in other conversations. And so I thought,
Oh,
oh, this is her other job during the day when she's, hiding behind the immigration attorney job.
oh,
She's flying
wow.
around.
Thank you. That's such a compliment. I love that.
So LinkedIn,
Yeah.
Google, they can Google your name. I
Yes.
presume other social media as well.
Yeah, we're on Avo, we're on lawyers.com, lots of different places. I'm horrible. I don't do Instagram. I apologize. I have a Facebook page, but
I
time.
Yeah, I was just gonna say with what you're dealing with, I don't think you really have time.
Yeah.
And all of this work has
Mm,
received numerous accolades. So before
mhm.
I let you go, I just want 1 minute, please, in 60 seconds, throw out some of the accolades you received. You're a super lawyer.
Yes.
Keep going.
That's the top 5% of lawyers over the age of 40 in all of Southern California. Even before I was 40, I got Rising Star, which is their version of under 40 people. I'm one of, I want to say there were 200 certified specialists in immigration law in the entire state of California. I used to be the chair or the president of the American Immigration Lawyers Association's Southern California chapter, which is responsible for training all the attorneys here in the area. I used to be on the National Board of Directors for the American Immigration Lawyers Association for many years, directing, policy and what we can try to impact as immigration lawyers. And it was exciting. I was on the board when DACA first came out. But some of the accolades I really love the most are the ones from my local domestic violence shelters, the National Domestic Violence Hotline, um, rape crisis center near me. I was a trainer early on for a lot of these advocates, the people who would give their shoes over to a woman that they went out to the scene when the police were called, when she was beating the crap out of and she had to leave and she was barefoot. I mean, amazing volunteer advocates who I would alert them to immigration issues that they should be asking. Maybe this woman doesn't want to cooperate with the police because she's afraid she's going to get deported. Maybe tell her that maybe she should talk to an immigration lawyer. There might be, VAWA or a U visa available to her. And it's been really amazing being part of those kinds of organizations where you can see really the worst of people, but the light bulbs, come alive. And one of my favorite reviews, I think it was on Google, was for a U visa survivor. She's just like, I went to so many other immigration attorneys and everyone said I had no case and I didn't really believe you. And we just kept trying and we got the cops to certify and we did it. And I have hope for the first time. And I was like, oh my goodness, you're gonna make me cry.
Right, right. Hope for the first time. I had this in my mind. I had this long conclusion to talk about how wonderful you are and how grateful I am that you are in my arsenal. And you just took it right away. That's the best way to just,
I'm thinking of my resume. What can I remember from that?
but that's the best way to wrap this up. You give hope. And we are grateful for that. And especially in the divorce world. I know your world is the immigration side, but in the divorce world, oftentimes that's just what a family needs is hope. And so I am grateful for your time and your energy and your practice and educating me along the way and spending time with me. Thank you so very, very much.
Oh, my pleasure. And I think that your work is very empowering towards women too. The light bulbs go off all the time. I think it's great.
Onward and upward. Here we go. Thank you.